And welcome back. So today it is Thursday, the 21st of July, and we are going to have a session today. Going to talk about the presentation a little bit at the beginning. I have one kind of not really major announcement, but you should know about it already. I've sent a couple of emails, and the department sent an email too. We're going to talk about fallacy of the day. And then we're going to dive into a couple of, again, increasingly hostile and contentious political arguments. And we'll see what they're doing well and what they're maybe doing not so well. First thing I did want to say is I had a whole thing with this. I sent an email about the course evaluation because I got an email saying that the evaluation period was open. So I assume you all got this email as well. It invites you to do our course evaluation, which is on the content area. I'll share my screen real quick and just kind of show you where it is. But it's this evaluation right here. I'll enter student preview mode so you can see what I'm talking about. It's right above homepage. And it's an external link that'll take you to the evaluation. So complete this evaluation. Fantastic. I really highly prize your evaluations, not only because in a couple of months they generally make me feel better about myself, but we also use them for the department to see how well people are engaging with the material. I use them to revise my course and update things. I want to know like your genuine feedback, what worked, what didn't for you. And I try to sort of model my course based on your criticisms thereafter. So that should be open. I think it closes on the 29th, so it's open like for a little while. And then I had a whole ordeal where I sent an email announcement around and I realized that the link didn't work in the email. So I ended up sending a follow-up email, and then I accidentally sent that same email the next. It was a whole thing. That's just me failing at technology. So I didn't mean to send you all like a whole bunch. After the third email, I was like, this is a disaster. I have to stop. But if you haven't dipped into that, please do whenever you get a chance. Otherwise, I have some presentation news to go into. So I will. Don't know why I closed the screen share a little early there. We'll get back to it. Let me move y'all over here. Rearrange you on my increasingly large screen. Okay. So if you go to course content now and navigate to the research module page, you will see attached to our presentation. Now you'll see a folder that says presentation schedule.pdf. If you open that, this contains basically an alphabetized list of the theoretical presentation schedule. Misty, I went ahead and put you number 1 in case you end up going that first day. Again, we can talk about that. But if not, we'll just start going down the list, right? And what I'll do is I'm basing this on a 10-minute bumper overall, right? About 3 to 5 minutes for your total presentation. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to set up. There'll be a little bit of time for questions afterwards. Some people inevitably might not show up and we might skip over them. Maybe they won't turn in a presentation. So maybe this goes a little bit faster than I anticipate, but I'm anticipating 10 people on day 1, 10 people on day 2, and 5 people to round us out on the last day. That should be actually, now that I think about it, I might have over, let's see, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So yeah, it should be about 50 minutes of presentation time plus like all preparation time. That should be enough time. If we end up going over, then we'll just bump, right? And we have a lot of extra time on that Thursday. So if we need overflow time, if we need to bump people to that Thursday off at the bottom of this Tuesday schedule, then we can. But this is the order I'm going to be calling upon you to go in. And in the name of illumination, hey, what do some of these presentations look like? Well, I have some student examples that I would like to share with you. At least you may be a little bit apprehensive about what your presentation might end up looking like. So this is a student model that I had in the fall. I have some aesthetic criticisms. I feel like this is a little busy, but it should give you like an idea of the kind of content that people had on their slides, right? Again, I remember some people were asking questions like, hey, are we just reading our paper or just cold reading our paper? Not necessarily, right? We're looking for the highlights. pulling out important quotes, using those as like a talking point that you're going to present around. I would say this is probably a little too much content on one slide, right? It's a little visually arresting and busy. But these are, I think, generally, they're pretty good images. They convey a sense of what you're talking about, right? You want your images to support the thing that you're talking about. But also notice how like these images are kind of crowding out the content a little bit there. It's kind of unclear, like, what am I supposed to be looking at? But as long as it sort of helps you visualize how you're going to organize your presentation, that's really the upshot. That's really what like the benefit of having the presentation is, right? Using some bold and some things like that. Like if you've ever used PowerPoint before, you've got like quite a lot of different template options to use. You can go up to design. There's a whole bunch of templates here. If you have the updated version, you can even go to design ideas and they'll like give you some like very slick. Oh, sorry, no design ideas for this slide. Sorry to all that going on here. But right, you need not feel like, okay, and again, you have some of this content is crowding out other content. There's just a lot going on here. But I think what this presentation does well is that there's a lot visually going on, but it's not like they just took their paper and put it onto each of these slides, right? There's important content, important highlight content that they're using to highlight a specific idea. I had a couple other examples too we can look at. This one's a little bit more minimal. This one's about the gold standard. And this is a little bit more, I think, less visually overpowering, but this student went with more of a like sort of bullet point type presentation where they just sort of use these points to like stimulate talking about general ideas of the background that they were talking about. They have some links that they put in here. A very creepy invisible hand. That was a little questionable, but talking about like what is the purpose of the gold standard versus like fiat money. So there's a lot of clip art that you can use in you can use a lot of icons. This is like downloaded content. You can always change whatever image you decide to put in. Where's my change picture? You can use stock images. These are from like the stock images on like a Bing search. It would be from mine's Windows. But you can use icons. You can search all of the internet. You can put whatever content on here you can. And again, right, like this one's a little bit more stripped down. There's only like a couple of images. It's a lot more like black and white content, right? A little bit more bullet point focused. And then I have one more. And these are all examples of students who were graded highly, right? There's an aesthetic component to your grade, but just like your essays that you turn in, just because you might score a little bit lower in one section doesn't mean that you're not going to score higher in others, right? It's not all about just your visual presentation. But this one, I think, kind of combines the two styles together. There's like good visuals. There's not too much content. It's pretty aesthetically like stripped down, but also is using, I think, space really well, and a pretty decent template. And also, right, there's just little notes that are just sort of giving this presenter like cues and ideas to talk about different things in their paper. You know your paper better than anybody, right? So like whatever notes on here that you want to give that more adequately stimulate what you want to say, that's really the kind of content that I'm looking for. So like more doesn't necessarily mean better in terms of a PowerPoint presentation. And as a matter of fact, less kind of means more in a PowerPoint presentation. Here we've got an important source. This is a picture of the author of that source. That's all useful information there. So I think the student was doing a really good job utilizing space in a very creative and helpful way. So hopefully those give you an idea of like what some people have done before you, so that maybe it might assuage some of your fears going into turning in the presentation. Great, good to hear. And now let me exit again because I keep forgetting to turn on the share sound feature. Let's look at some fallacies. Or actually, before we do that, while I'm getting that up, does anybody have any questions? Does that pretty adequately address maybe some concerns or fears that you have?
That was super helpful to see those.
Great. Good to hear.
Definitely. So as long as we're making our topic clear and then the points to our thesis, and then we include like kind of like a works cited slide as well, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have, it doesn't have to be as official as your like works cited in your draft, but like, you know, like that one student at the end had like one page where she just kind of talked about her source. And so there was like, you know, some biographical information about the author, the title, that source, right? If you want to include a page there, if you want to sort of talk about a couple of your important sources or maybe one important source that you want to highlight, yeah, dedicate a page of your slide to that and talk about like, you know, this is why this source is important. You know, it either, you know, maybe I leaned really heavily on this source to make my point, or maybe this source said something that I just could not let go of and I had to refute it. Like this is, it played an important role because I had to I had to like take this source on and like overcome its challenge or something like that, right? Does that make sense?
Right. Okay. And as far as the visuals, like the pictures or any videos, do we need to like cite those separately from the presentation?
I'm going to say in a more formal setting, you probably will. I'm not going to require you to do like MLA citation on any content you find from the internet. It's probably not best practices, and I'm probably going to regret recording that. But I would say generally lean on, if you can only stock your stuff with like Creative Commons content that's clearly attributable, then that's fine. Otherwise, you don't have to tell me like, you know, this was a photograph taken by, you know, this National Geographic photographer. This is really just a pretty informal presentation. I'm not really looking for you to like, you know, I'm not going to hold you legally accountable for any of the copyrighted content you may insert in your slide. Although don't make your presentation like, okay, now we're going to watch this 5-minute YouTube video. I'm also not looking for you to do that. Right. It is your presentation that I'm looking for more than anything else.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great. And don't fear being a bad public speaker. That's, you know, that's why we do these things. Just take solace in the fact that I've seen some tremendously bad public speakers, and it's fine. You're gonna get up, you'll talk for a few minutes, and it's gonna feel like it goes on in a way a lot faster than it actually does. I don't know, some people think it's interminable, but actually I find that a few minutes goes by like way faster than you anticipate. So all right. The first thing I want to talk about, there's a couple of images and some written content that I want to talk about. The first one is Carey has a Burger King sign that I want to talk about. Now, I'm not using the exact image that a couple of y'all gave me, because sometimes I would go and I would try to take the URL, and the URL ended up being like the entire document. So I was like, okay, I'll just find this picture or one that looks enough like it. But so this is an image on a Burger King sign. Don't eat with a clown. Oh, actually, this one says eat with the king. The one that I was looking for, it actually said, don't eat with a clown, dine with a king, or dine with the king in particular. And actually, now that that's a deeply unsatisfying version of that, let me see if I can just go to the discussion threads and pull it up. Aha. Might be a little small. Let's see. I can kind of blow it up a little bit here. Why eat with a clown? You can dine with a king. Kara says this is an example of the ad hominem fallacy, attacking and dismiss, and I would also say kind of an equivocation, right? Using the fact that Ronald McDonald is a clown, sort of equivocating on the idea of like a clown also being a foolish person, right? Not just necessarily the mascot, but like, why eat with a fool when you could dine with a king, right? Using the equivocating on those mascots as if they were the thing itself, right? Instead of just like images or symbols of the thing. And I want to call some attention to the analysis that you did on this one, because I found this really, really great. The sign can be viewed as an ad hominem fallacy due to the fact that Burger King is attacking McDonald's for their mascot and turn encouraging readers not to eat with their competitors. Obviously, a mascot does not indicate the quality of the food served, but is still used as an argument not to eat at McDonald's. There's also notable language, such as eat with a clown versus dine with a king, giving off the effect of a more pleasant dining experience at Burger King. I think that's a really great catch there. Those different verbs, right? Eat versus dine, right? The different connotations that those verbs entail, right? If you're just eating, that, I could just, when I went to the HEB earlier today and I was listening to my podcast out in the car, I was just eating a sandwich really quickly because I had to get back here and like fire all this stuff up. I wasn't dining, right? I wasn't like Ed Sheeran going to the posh restaurant and dining, right? Dining has this suggestion of a little bit more fanciness about it, a little bit more of like a, sitting down at a table, right? As opposed to just eating or gorging, right? So I thought that was a really good catch on the language, like noticing how like the emotional connotations of those words were being used too. Also, the versus a is signifies importance. Mr. McDonald is, I like how formal that is. Mr. McDonald, Mr. Clown is portrayed as a clown in general, while the king is specified and unique. I think that's a really great reading of definite articles. Like as a grammar person, I love that. Right, A is general, right? Not just it's a clown versus the king, the general versus the specific, right? There are many clowns, there's only one king. I think that's a really good catch, and I like how robust of a reading of the language there was in this, like basically the length of a haiku on this Burger King sign. I think that's a really deft reading. I really enjoyed that. We have another one here, another exchange. I thought this was fantastic. This is Klaus's bandwagon fallacy. Again, this might not be the exact picture. I hate using Pinterest, but it is what it is. Okay, go away. Yeah, all right. There we go. Trust the brand more dentists than hygienists use. And in addition to the bandwagon, this is like we've seen kind of similar toothpaste-like commercials or oral care commercials. That just because dentists and hygienists are using this doesn't necessarily imbue that use with authority, right? There's also an appeal to authority fallacy going on here, right? Even if a dentist was standing there saying, "I use Oral B," right? Well, what are the merits of the Oral B, right? That's we're not trying to substitute credentials for credibility. We're still looking at what's the language saying, what are the claims that they're making. And Raquel has, I think, a great elaboration on this one. Toothbrushing isn't effective as the toothbrushing isn't effective based on the product one uses. It's more so the technique of the toothbrushing that's what is effective. You could brush with a soft toothbrush with just water along with flossing on a daily basis and be less likely to get cavities and prevent gingivitis. I think that's a great insight, that it's not necessarily like the brand loyalty that even does anything, or even necessarily the design of the toothbrush. It's the idea of brushing your teeth as opposed to not brushing your teeth is the thing. As long as you're addressing your oral hygiene is better than not addressing your oral hygiene. I just thought that was a really good elaboration too of what's going on there. And we have a couple things going on with brand loyalty today too that I think are really interesting. Beer commercials figuring prominently and emotionally in today's menu of fallacies. But before that, I really liked this one. This was Mike's cryptocurrency FTX commercial, which I think was a Super Bowl commercial.
I call it the wheel.
I don't think so. What does it do?
It rolls.
Yeah, so does a bagel, okay? A bagel you can eat. One of the worst ideas I've ever heard.
Brother David, behold, the fork.
I got 10 forks right here, baby! Am I right? Yes.
My lord?
What is it?
A toilet, my lord.
A toilet? You expect this court to do its business inside? We're not animals. We go outside like humans.
It's coffee. It's new.
Oh, it's awful.
You don't like it?
I'm all jittery and feel like I got a big job coming on.
Hancock, you sign first.
No king! Gentlemen, have you taken leave of your senses?
The people shall have the right to vote.
Even the stupid ones?
Yes.
Stupid people vote?
Yes.
Edison, can I be honest with you? It stinks. Does your wife know what's going on here?
She knows I go to work.
You're wasting your time, and it's sad. You might as well put the dishes in the shower.
Hey, Catherine, what's cooking?
We're putting a man on the moon.
Are you out of your mind? I can't even get tuna without celery. Nobody's going to the moon, ever.
Why not?
It's too far. It's far. It's really far. It's far.
我々の未来はポータブルミュージックです。
バカかバカかわかるだろうわかるだろうわかるだろう
出ていけ。
見ないのか怖いんだバタリがいつも言えるぞバタリどこバタリ
Like I was saying, it's FTX. It's a safe and easy way to get into crypto.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I'm never wrong about this stuff. Never. Franklin! Hey, I left my cane in there. What? What do you mean? Hey, that's an expensive cane!
Larry David, an American treasure. I really like that one because there's again, it's one of these ones that has like a lot going on, right? Mike, I think you're totally right about the bandwagon, right? You don't want to miss out, right? It's that FOMO idea, like, oh, be like all the people that got in early, right? You too could be a winner. It's also interesting because Larry's character throughout the ages is kind of always representing the appeal to tradition, right? And it's kind of putting this idea and tension of like the progressive forces of the future versus the regressive forces of the past that are too blind to see that like something is good that's right in front of them, right? So that you've got all these instances of like, you know, this defeating a particular fallacy, which I think is interesting. And then kind of rolled into that, what I think another one buried in the background of this, and this I think really appeals to whether like what your personal beliefs about crypto are, is, you know, is the analogy towards all of these world-changing inventions, is that a strong analogy, right? Is crypto like the wheel? Is crypto like electricity, right? Is this a game-changing technology that is going to produce outstanding consequences, missing out on which would be a terrible thing for you to do, right? Exactly. Is it actually the next big thing, right? If it is, then it's not necessarily a weak analogy. If it's not, then it is kind of a weak analogy, right? And not just a weak analogy, kind of a false dichotomy too, right? You're either going to get in on the next big thing or you're not. You're going to be like Larry. You're going to be like this or you're going to be like Larry, right? So it's like, so I think it's a smart commercial because it's aware of a particular kind of fallacy too, but it's also like it's doing a lot to frame this technology in a very positive light, right? So that it's sort of trying to buttress itself against being seen as the weak analogy. I think again, it's really entertaining one. Great use of Larry David. 4 stars. Go home to your mother. And this next incredibly creepy commercial, brought to you by Abby, is for Sprite, cranberry Sprite.
It's the thirstiest time of the year. I have just one query.
Want a Sprite cranberry?
The answer is clear. It's the thirstiest time of the year. Sprite, let's go.
Okay. There's always such a like Bryce mentioned, the uncanny valley. Like claymation can only do so much. I don't know. And I don't even know if that was like claymation or if it was animated to look like claymation. It's very disturbing. Anyhow, but yeah, Abby's pointing to the false authority and the bandwagon fallacy. It's very cursed. It does not age well. Be like you two could be having all of this fun if you only drank cranberry Sprite. Also using the star power of LeBron James clearly, and is that Little John? The guy with glasses? What was he at? Yeah. Anybody knows? Let me know. Maybe it's in the comments. Actually, I don't know if I want to get literally the one commercial I'll never skip. I don't even know if I want to look into the comments on the YouTube channel. But I wanted to pause over that just because it's a good example of a lot of what we've seen with the bandwagon and the false authority. But just I had to watch that, and now you have to watch that too. Kylie brings us an interesting commercial. There's a lot of engagement with a couple of these commercials. People have some very strong feelings about Ed Sheeran.
I've got an idea for a Heinz ketchup commercial. I was at this super posh restaurant, super posh. The type of place that has chandeliers and paintings on the wall and way too many forks. I think classical music was playing, but maybe it was jazz. No, definitely classical. The hostess walks up to me and she said, "Mr. Sheeran, is this your first time dining with us?" And I say, "Yep." The waiter comes over, he's telling me about the specials. Super fancy vegetables, fancy sauces. I said, "Sounds fancy." So fast forward and the food comes. The waiter goes on to tell me, "We are proud to present this farm to table blah blah blah, posh and fancy blah blah blah, with a side of blah blah blah." You know, the food looked good. I just thought there was something missing. So I reach into my bag and I take out the only thing that can complete me. And at that point, the whole world came to a stop. And the waiter was screaming through his eyes. So that's my idea. Do you want to do it?
Okay. This is amusing. Another very well done commercial. I would like to point out something about Ed Sheeran. In marketing, there's a term called positioning. Positioning refers to how your brand sees itself in the marketplace, how it distinguishes itself among a myriad of competitors. What makes your brand unique? What's different about it? What's exciting? What makes people emotionally attached to your brand, right? That's how Apple positions itself as, we are the cutting edge, the innovators. We don't make computers, we make pieces of art that happen to run software, right? Heinz ketchup positions itself as the simple man's condiment, right? Ed Sheeran in this, he's playing with this idea. This is a classic narrative. This is fish out of water, right? This is the funny thing here is, look at humble Ed Sheeran coming into a super fancy restaurant. Look at him among all of this posh style where he's very much out of place, right? You can see some visual cues here, right? He's not dressed appropriately, right? Everybody here is in nicer clothes, but Ed Sheeran's wearing a backpack over a checkered shirt. But it's also interesting to point out that how highly curated Ed Sheeran as an individual artist is himself. This is it's a simple enough shirt, but I don't know what brand this is. I imagine it's a very expensive shirt, even though it is very simple and visually unarresting. Ed Sheeran is a multi-million-dollar celebrity. He is the kind of person that if he walked into this restaurant looking like this, because he has money, he might not even that's not the thing that bothers people. It's when he takes out the ketchup, right? He doesn't start getting treated differently until he takes out the ketchup, which is right here, much to the horror of that little dog, right? that's the thing that like really sends the message that like, oh, Ed Sheeran's still just a simple guy, right? Like, I think the fallacy that's going on here really, like, it's not quite a named fallacy, but it's like the opposite of the appeal to snobbery. This is like the appeal to simplicity. This is like some sort of manipulation of Occam's razor, or some kind that like, simple is always better, right? That you could call this the Leonard Skinner simple man fallacy or something like that, right? That like it's always about like, you know, the way that he positions himself, the way that he's sort of made up and marketed in this commercial is like, Ed Sheeran's just a normal guy. He's just like you and me. He's just an everyman. Ed Sheeran's a multimillionaire. He would never, like, he might carry around a bottle of ketchup. I don't know. Maybe he might now because of this commercial, because he might, like, every time he's seen with a bottle of ketchup, he might get X amount of royalties. But it's just it's selling you this idea of being simple when this is actually like a highly curated, highly controlled environment, which is not simple at all. And so like the comments under this are really funny too. People being like, oh, Ed Sheeran, of course, he'd be the one to walk in there like that. It's a meta commercial. He's talking about the pitch he made. Like, Ed Sheeran is very aware of persona and positioning and marketing. So it's very slickly done, but fallacy as well, I believe. Not necessarily bad. We're going to see some examples of things today that I don't want to give you the impression that, you know, companies are always just, you know, negatively trying to, you know, often commercials are really funny. Often commercials have a good message, like the Budweiser commercial that we're going to look at, and the Heineken commercial too, that especially the Budweiser commercial in particular, at least among y'all, was like kind of not necessarily polarizing, but like, oh, like, yeah, this may be fallacious, but like, it's got a good message, right? It's saying a thing that's like sort of responsible. And then the Heineken commercial, if you look at all the comments under the Heineken commercial, it's just like, you would believe these people, they were like, oh, finally Heineken solved world peace. It's a little hyperbolic. But not, they're not always nefarious. It's just that the reason why I say that these are all fallacies is because at the end of the day, these are companies selling something. They're either selling an image of themselves or they're selling a product. Primarily, they're selling products, but you know, there's also brand marketing where they're just sort of cultivating a positive image about the company, which is what I think you have a little bit more of with the Budweiser and Heineken commercials than. And this is a little bit of doing both. It's sort of positioning, selling you Heinz as, oh, here's a company with a funny sense of humor, and it's like very self-aware, it's very ironic, it's very internet postmodern, right? But it's also appealing to people by using the authenticity appeal of Ed Sheeran. And I think it's very self-aware of that. Let's see. Couple of Snickers commercials. Which one do I want to watch? I think we're gonna watch Cats. But Misty, you also have a Snickers commercial. There's a bunch of DirecTV commercials that I also kind of skipped over this time. Oh, okay. Oh no, this is the opposite. This is the other one. This is the one with Robin Williams. I guess they're short enough. We could watch them both. But I did skip over a couple of DirecTV bandwagon or Slippery Slope commercials because they're all just kind of the same thing. And we've had like a bunch of DirecTV, but this is like an ad for an ad. Okay, ads within
Coach, what do we do?
I'll tell you what we do. I want you to go on the field, look for anyone with an O. Let's kill them with kindness. Jimmy, I want you to make balloon animals. Tyler, make little tea cozy, something fun.
Are you okay?
We will win this for Mother Russia!
Coach, eat a Snickers.
Why is that, Chief?
You get a little loopy when you're hungry. Better.
Now let's go for it! Go get him, guys!
You're not you when you're hungry.
Bobcat Goldthwait. Talking about a name that nobody knows anymore. And so then we've got Misty has the other most hilarious version of this commercial.
Mike, come on!
Mike, what is your deal, man?
Come on, man. You've been riding me all day.
Mike, you're playing like Betty White out there.
That's not what your girlfriend said.
Baby.
Eat Snickers. Better?
Better.
I'm all bet!
That hurt.
You're not you when you're hungry. Snickers satisfies.
Okay. Keeps on starting over. Yeah, I think like the like the FTX commercial, I think it's a lot of fallacies sort of rolled up into one, right? Like there's some appeal to authority, right? Trafficking in the star power of Betty White, trafficking in the star power of Robin Williams. I guess to a much lesser extent, the star power of Bobcat Goldthwait, if y'all are into like comedians with odd voices from the C-list of the early 90s. But as Kat points out, also there's the post hoc fallacy going on here, right? Just because you eat a Snickers doesn't mean that you're going to improve in this particular way. And even if you do actually improve, you can't necessarily attribute that to the Snickers itself. And the hasty generalization that if you do eat a Snickers all of a sudden, like maybe you do eat a Snickers and you sort of perform better, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to hold for everybody else. And the bandwagon fallacy, as Misty points out, right? Eat this Snickers and you can play just as good as all of these other people, right? Maybe a little bit of false dichotomy. You're either running around like somebody crazy or old like Betty White, or you're young and virile. Either way, eat the Snickers. So those are fun. I really enjoyed the Betty White one. You're playing like Betty White out there. It's very solid. This is really funny. Now, so Socorro has brought us like a very heart-wrenching narrative tale of a boy and his dog.
Welcome home, buddy.
You and me, we were made for love. A lifetime is not long enough to show you what you mean to me. Ooh, I'll be waiting here for you when you come home to me.
I'll see you later, buddy. I'm sorry. I decided I shouldn't drive home last night. I stayed at Dave.
When you come home,
I'm back. I'm back.
To me.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. This is emotionally moving, right? Chills. I have goosebumps, although the air conditioner just kicked on, so maybe it's that too. But I think there's something to be said about
welcome home.
Like the strong narrative that you're being told here, right? What appeal do you think is being used in this ad? The original post was appeal to pity and missing a point. I think the appeal to pity is exactly what's going on, right? Like this is an image of like, this isn't necessarily a commercial selling you beer, right? This is a commercial that is selling you on the Budweiser brand as being like responsible and invested in their consumers, right? Like, we're not encouraging you to drink irresponsibly. We are encouraging you to drink responsibly, right? And you can see that like the narrative tension. And Missy, you're getting really your confusion about what the appeal was in this. I don't think is accidental, right? I think this is something that it's an issue that hits really emotionally close, because the message at the end, right? The saddest part we see is like right before the dog, like right when the dog doesn't know, right? Where is he at? The dog's waiting. Oh, that noise, the whimper of a dog, right? The saddest noise in the world, right? And it's like right here, right? This is the appeal to pity, right? You should not drink and drive because your loved ones will miss you, right? Which that's the appeal, right? It's not selling you on the idea of drinking responsibly for the sake of drinking responsibly. It's you shouldn't drink and drive because other people are going to like be sad about the consequences of your actions, right? And there's like, you can see all this like product branding that's being built. And also like, notice the kind of consumer that is being like, that we're learning about in this ad, right?
You and me, we were made for love. A lifetime is not long enough to show you.
so far, so far, what kind of person is this? Just a normal person. He's got a dog. He's playing with the dog. He's sick. He's not having a good time.
What you mean to me?
That's the first beer we see in the commercial. The first indication that this is a beer commercial at all is that I guess he's eating peanut butter beer. He's giving the dog peanut butter. I don't know what's going on there really. He's probably giving the dog peanut butter. He's having a beer though, right? Look at the way he's dressed, right? He's a nice, college age, sweater wearing, beige pants wearing young man, right? He's really responsible, feeding his dog some peanut butter. Right, he's driving. He goes to the beach with his friends. They're all having a good time. There's no visible beers anywhere. There's some branded merch over here on the chair, right? Oh, they're having a good time. Oh, here they are responsibly having some beers around the fire, right? 1 beer apiece. They have 1 6-pack. 6 people are having 1 6-pack. We don't see this guy get drunk. Right? That's the thing. We're being told a story about a responsible individual of legal age who occasionally enjoys his favorite brand of beer, Budweiser. And that person goes out and has a special relationship with his dog and his family that indicates that he is a loyal individual. And he goes out and he has a responsible time and he comes home. This doesn't say anything about like the people, drinking is not an option, right? Like he could go out and not have a Budweiser, but they don't want to show you that because the goal is also, we have to sell you beer, right? We want to sell you beer, but we don't want you to die and go to jail, right? So we have to show you images of responsible beer ownership. And they're using the appeal to pity to move you to this like feeling of like, like it is responsible. People shouldn't be drinking and driving, right? But it's not necessarily because people will be sad if something bad happens to you. Even if nothing bad happens to you, almost the worst thing that can happen from drinking and driving is nothing bad happening, because then that might normalize the idea that you can go out drinking and driving, and most of the time nothing bad's going to happen. So that's why it's not an appeal that's based on logic. This is an appeal based on creating a character and telling you a story about that character, right? And moving you towards pity. So I thought this was a really great example too, because it's a beer commercial about not selling beer. And there's a very similar thing going on in this Heineken commercial, which is very long, but worth the wait.
I would describe my political views as the new right.
Very British.
Feminism today is man-hating.
I would describe myself as a feminist, 100%.
I don't believe that climate change exists. We're not taking enough action on climate change.
I think it's about time these people got off their high horse and started looking for credible problems that actually exist.
It's absolutely critical that trans people have their own voice.
That's not right. You can't, you're a man, be a man, or you're a female, be a female.
Women do need to remember that we need you to have our children.
Could I be friends with someone that says a woman's place in the home?
Right, okay, well, I'm an expert at flat packs. If you have any trouble, just watch me.
So it looks like I've got your instructions here.
I think so. Let me help you.
It's not just that bit there.
Describe what it is like to be you in 5 adjectives.
Okay, frustrating.
Dedicated.
Opinionated.
Lucky.
Ambitious.
Offensive.
Solemn. I have ups and downs.
Strong.
I want to say attacked, misunderstood.
Name 3 things you and I have in common.
We're both male, we're both confident, and we're both loudly spoken.
We know each other better than people who've known each other for 10 minutes should.
You seem quite ambitious and positive, and you've got this really, got a glow. Do you know what I'm saying? Your aura's pretty cool.
I'm sensing, are you former military or something?
People have said that, but there is no history. So are you then? Ex-military?
Yeah.
If you're ex-military, I'm very proud of you already.
Well.
So.
I grew up in a bit of a rough state. I've experienced homelessness. I've known what it's like to have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely most grateful just for life.
We've only just met, but I think you're the sort of person that would listen to me and we'd have a discussion rather than an argument. Yeah, you could hang out with, man.
Let's go. My chance.
Goodness sake. You're right, mate. Fitter than I look.
Perfecto.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I think we just built a bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you are. Each take a bottle and place it on its corresponding markings on the bar.
Attention. Please now stand to watch a short film.
Feminism today is definitely an excuse for misandry, man-hating.
If somebody said to me that climate change is destroying the world, then I'd say that is total piffle.
So transgender, it is very odd. We're not set up to understand or see things like that.
I am a daughter, a wife. I am transgender.
I feel like the battle for feminism definitely isn't done. The fight is never going to be over, if I'm honest with you.
You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer.
I'm only joking.
You had me for a second then.
Well, I'm having a drink. I'm having a drink.
Yeah.
I want to discuss.
Beer.
Yeah, beer and discuss.
Cheers.
At the end of the day, mate,
About
I've
reaching
enjoyed
out to
working with
people,
you.
yeah. And, you know, even if you wanted to convince people about your point, the productive thing to do would be to sit down, have a
Just
beer.
engage.
I've been brought up in a way where everything's black and white, but life isn't black and white.
Yeah, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Smash the patriarchy.
I'll give you my mobile number, you give me yours, and we'll keep in touch. I'd have to tell my girlfriend that I'll be texting another girl. She might get a bit upset with that, but I'll have to get round that.
I'll have to tell my girl.
Okay. Long commercial. So Rebecca, I'm really glad you turned me on to this commercial. I thought this was a really great thing. One, this is like telling us a story I think we all want to be true, right? We all want to think that all of our problems can be reduced to just sitting down and engaging productively, even with people that share absolutely opposite views. On the other hand, how much of an oversimplification and hasty generalization is the actual commercial demonstrating, right? Like, it is a wonderful story that all it takes is just sitting down and having a beer with somebody, especially if that beer is a Heineken. But that's not, we have 4 cases, right? There's 7 billion people in the world. Is that going to work all the time? Probably not, right? There are even some very important things that this ad says, like sit down and engage with people from the opposite side. I think that's an excellent message. At the same time, this is a Heineken commercial. They're telling you the story, and you should see the comments in this. The comments are all about how great, best commercial ever. I watched the whole thing. Heineken is so great. This is a commercial that Heineken crafted to make you feel better about Heineken, right? At the end of the day. And even if they are trying to sell you a message that our differences are not so large that we can't solve them, they want you to solve them by remembering that Heineken is a part of that solution, right? And that's why this is such a great example of why I think that, no matter how good a feeling a commercial might inspire, it is at the end of the day selling you something. It has a very particular goal. It's selling you either products or ideas. And propaganda can be very inspiring, but it is, at the end of the day, it's propaganda. This one really made me wonder. I was like, can propaganda be art? Like, is there some way that like advertising is like the art of capitalism, say? Traditionally, we don't think about art like that. Traditionally, we think that art doesn't have a specific message. We talk about, you got any English class, art has a theme, right? There are different themes in art. Not everybody reads something and gets the same theme out of it. Whereas when you look at something like advertising or targeted propaganda, there's a specific message that you are meant to get out of that story, right? This story is, remember that sit down, have a beer. Your differences are not too big that a Heineken can't cure it. Go, don't drink, but drink responsibly and have a couple of Budweisers with some good friends, right? Go play with your friends, but everybody gets frustrated, but just have a Snickers and you'll all get along, right? Like at the end of the day, there is like a specific idea that you're being sold, even if it's not like the end goal is not to go out at the end of that commercial and purchase that product. Sometimes it's just cultivating a brand awareness, right? And that's like, it gets back to this idea of positioning. Like, when you go to a place to make purchases, what motivates your behavior, right? And I can't reduce all behavior to one particular motive, but I do know that like when I go out to things like how much of my decision making is informed by like what vague things I remember about brand positioning versus like what things that I know about like the merits of the product. I like to think that I'm a pretty informed consumer, but it takes a lot of time to do that. It took like 6 months for me watching YouTube videos to like buy a car. So I don't do that to every purchase, right? I just go out and I'm like, whatever. Crest, it's got charcoal in it. Charcoal, it's elemental. That's fine. Sure, I'll take it, right? I could just as easily wash my teeth with baking soda. Wash my teeth is a weird way to say that. Don't tell anybody I'm washing my teeth. I'll be ostracized from polite society. On that note, I think that's a good place to take a break. Let's go ahead and let's take 10. I'll see y'all back at, let's call it 7:07. We just ticked over, and we'll pick back up with a couple of arguments. Oh, hello there. I kind of caught up reading the article, and I looked over and was like, "Oh no, this is 2 minutes late." Yeah, I have some thoughts. So welcome back. What we'll do now is I think I want to approach these next two arguments in unchronological order. Yeah, I want to approach them in unchronological order. The first one is going to be, let's go ahead and let's pull it up. Any thoughts about these before we jump in on what's just sure to be it was a lot. Yeah, I think it was a lot from both for sure. And I don't want to be like both sides. I'm not particularly pleased with how Shepard handles himself. I think in the same way that Tucker's argument last week came off as, if you don't agree with him, kind of shrill and indignant. I think Shepard comes across in that same way. I think just in terms of establishing like reasonable tone, DeSanctis does a much better job of doing that. And so we'll start with this. But there's a couple of things that DeSanctis does that they checked at least one of my like all-time internet trigger boxes, and we'll get to that. So both these published in 2021, right? This one's published on March 5th. This one a little bit earlier. This is January 15th. This one has a much more like recent January 6th events take on cancel culture in particular. This was a little bit later in the year, a few months later. So DeSantis starts out, which I'll tell you right now, I have no idea. I don't think there's any relation between this DeSantis and the DeSantis that is the governor of Florida, other than they happen to be politically aligned and their last names are the same, but it could be. But Alexandra starts off, or DeSantis starts off, when complaining about cancel culture, conservatives tend to lament its most obvious problem. Its aim of censoring, ostracizing, and otherwise punishing people or perspectives that progressives deem unacceptable. So we have a couple of things happening here, right? One, we get a definition of cancel culture, which is usually a good thing. And I think this is a good thing too, especially with a phrase like cancel culture. It's one of those sort of nebulous buzzwords like mainstream media or Hollywood. They just kind of gets thrown around. And at least if there is some definition to start with, that's a good thing. The way that this is being defined though, censuring. Censure is slightly different than censor, right? To censure something, we don't need to go to the etymology dictionary necessarily. Censure, a judgment involving condemnation, right? So if you censor something, you are making it unavailable. You're redacting it. You're making it inaccessible in some way. If you censure somebody, you are condemning them morally, right? Or you're reprimanding them, right? Like for instance, when what is the word? What's the word I'm looking for? When we impeach an official, say, unless that official is removed from office, the charge of impeachment is a censure. It is just morally condemning that person. When we do it to a senator, it's actually called, you can censure senators and other public representatives. It's like an official act that you can do in like a parliamentary system. It's just a passing of judgment. It's just saying this thing bad, right? That's censure. That is censorship, which is distinct from censorship, right? So condemnation versus not making unavailable, right? Ostracization. What does it mean to ostracize? To kick out, right? To turn into an ostrich. No, I'm just kidding. It means literally to cast out, right? To exile by ostracism. to exclude from a group by common consent, right? Or otherwise punish people or perspectives, right? So far, I'm kind of with you. That progressives deem unacceptable. This is the part of the definition that I think kind of falls apart. Because this is kind of positioning, to bring back a marketing term, it positions cancel culture as peculiar to the left wants to cancel things on the right. When all the way up until this part of the definition, cancel culture shares all of the features of what is otherwise just historically known as public shaming, which has existed in various forms throughout the history of mankind, right? Internet cancel culture, if you want to call it that, is just it's the latest digital incarnation of a thing that humans have been doing for a long freaking time, right? It's not necessarily peculiar to the left or right, but this person is positioning it as like, in particular, cancel culture is something that it's things that people on the left just don't like, they cancel, whatever that means, right? They ostracize it, they morally condemn it, and they punish, right? Those are the three main features of the canceling. So, no, which importantly is not censorship necessarily, right? Censorship is, especially in a place like the United States where we have like very broad censorship laws from a government perspective, individual companies and people can censor things. The government is the one that is not allowed to come in and say, like, you can't say this or that, right? Which, that, to put a pin in that, that's going to be important in just a minute when we talk about Amazon. Also, we have an interesting dichotomy being set up immediately: conservatives versus progressives, right? What's a conservative, so that we're all on the same page? This should lead to some lively descriptions. Okay, we'll put a pin in the right-left thing, but I would definitely like to grab onto less government, right? If we wanted to oversimplify the progressive conservative political distinction, conservatives tend to want smaller government, at least in theory, and progressives tend to want not as small government, at least in theory. So we can get a little bit more specific with those definitions if we appeal to just the dictionary definition of a conservative. Tending to or constituting a political party professing the principles of conservatism. Conservative means something a little bit different in the United Kingdom than it does in the United States. These definitions are important: tending or disposed to maintaining existing views, conditions, or institutions; traditional, marked by or relating to traditional norms of taste, elegance, style, and manners. So big on traditional institutions. Again, smaller government. You might hear the word originalist interpretation being thrown around sometimes, especially in relation to like a Supreme Court justice or something like that. We could go further and look up what principles of conservatism mean, if those are even listed in the dictionary, which they are not. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, a political party based on tradition and social stability, stressing established institutions and preferring gradual development to abrupt change. Sure, right? It's a generally pretty neutral definition of conservatism. Versus progressives. We do the same thing with progressive. What is generally a progressive? Well, it of or characterized by progression. All of these are a little bit vague. Of or marked by progress, of or related to or constitution and educational theory, marked by emphasis on the individual child, informality of class and procedure and encouragement. These aren't really necessarily the political definitions. Often capitalized, of or relating to progressives. You know, we can find a capital P progressive definition in the dictionary. Member of political parties, such as a member of a predominantly agrarian minor party in the 1912s, one believing in moderate political change, especially social improvement by government action. This is probably the closest we're going to get to a progressive with a capital P, right? It's not enough to just define it in opposition to conservative. You want more than just not this, right, out of your definition. That's not very descriptive. But we have a general sense of like conservatives tend to favor social institutions and smaller government. Progressives tend to favor social solutions, which tend to increase the size of government. Let's just go with that. Now, we immediately get a new term, though many on the left. What's the left? And even further, what's the capital left? Who has a radical approach to sex, gender identity, and sexual reassignment procedures, right? The left is a little bit muddier, right? I could appeal to the dictionary. I could look up, well, what's the left? Political groups who favor sharing monetary money and property more equally among members of society. Political groups who support liberal or socialist policies. And I think that's an important distinction. Not all liberals are socialists. Not all socialists are necessarily identify themselves as liberals. And this is why, getting back to what you were saying, Deborah, about the left-right lean thing. The left-right lean it's like this commonly used false dichotomy we always use to say that like left or right, Republican, Democrat, progressive, conservative. There's differences in those things that we often eradicate by appealing to those generalizations. And one of those things is the left, where the left can mean anything that you don't like on that day. It can lump in anarcho-communists with Joe Biden. And those are two very different things. If you think Joe Biden is an anarcho-communist, I would strongly suggest looking up the definition of an anarcho-communist. Probably somebody like Nestor Makhno in the early 1900s in the Ukraine, or the pre-Soviet revolution style politics. If you're interested in varieties of things on the very far left, which Joe Biden is most assuredly not. Joe Biden is at best a liberal, at worst, like a moderate who's kind of has a lot of conservative tendencies too. Anyhow, that's a debate for a different day. The point is, the word left really collects a lot of stuff in its umbrella, and that is not necessarily clear about what you're talking to. Progressive is a little bit general, but there's a specific definition. Once you start moving to the idea of the left, now you're conflating different ideas under one thing. It would be just as egregious if I were to call, DeSanctis never refers to anybody on the right as much as they talk about conservatives, right? I don't even know if they mention the word right in a political saying. The right of every human. There's talk of rights in general, but though many on the left insist that cancel culture is purely an invention of angry right-wingers, right? So it's only used as a negative, like it's only used in painting the negative caricature that the left like deploys as a cartoon character, right? DeSantis usually refers to themselves and people like them as conservatives. Again, not necessarily Republicans, right? Conservative is bigger than Republican. There's no conservative party in the United States. There are conservative Republicans, there are libertarians, there are anarcho-capitalists. There are as many strains of right-wing thought or conservative thought as there are left. So it's important to be precise with your language, and I think that DeSantis is kind of being unfair about some of their dichotomies here. And then the way that this part is laid out, I kind of have a problem with too. Though many on the left insist that cancel culture is purely an invention of an angry right-wingers, examples abound. This calendar year alone, we've seen a Disney star fired for social media post, a New York Times journalist asked to resign after having responded to a question about a racial slur by invoking the slur itself, and a television host who recused himself from his post after suggesting that, just maybe, we should hesitate before excommunicating from polite society anyone who has attended a gathering with a theme now found objectionable. In the world of cancel culture, irony is dead. This connection between these premise and this conclusion to me is incredibly unclear. What is irony? It's important to understand what irony is if we're to countenance this relationship between premises, examples, and conclusion.
I feel like I should know, but I don't know how to define it. It's not sarcasm.
Well,
Is it like
sarcasm
higher
is one
sarcasm?
example of irony,
Okay.
right? Sarcasm is an example of what we would call verbal irony. It's saying one thing but meaning another, right? Situational irony is generally what we mean in this context. Situational irony is the events producing exactly the opposite of the intended consequences. Think of that Alanis Morissette song about irony, where none of those events are actually ironic, right? The idea of raining on your wedding day is not ironic unless you specifically went to Seattle to have your wedding and you lived in Arizona because you wanted to be absolutely sure that it did rain on your wedding day, or other way around, sorry. Unless you lived in Seattle and then you went to Arizona and then it rained on your wedding day in Arizona, that would be ironic because you fled from a state of affairs and have produced its opposite. Irony is the idea that the thing that you expect actually does not turn out to be. Whether or not these are examples of things reaching their exact opposite conclusions, it really depends on how they're being defined here, right? A couple of these have links, and I could chase these down, but it is on DeSanctis to, in language, adequately describe these things. If you're going to call these things irony, it should be very clear from the way that you're describing them that they are indeed ironic, especially if examples abound. This calendar year alone, we've seen a Disney star fired for a social media post. That's not particularly ironic. I don't really see what the irony is there. I would have to do a little bit more research into that. A New York Times journalist had to resign after having responded to a question about a racial slur by invoking the slur itself. That could be ironic, right? If I'm being asked about a racial slur and I use that slur as in my response to the original question, and then I'm punished for merely mentioning something rather than using it in a negative way, then I would call that ironic, right? Okay, maybe we've got one example there. A television host who recused himself from his post after suggesting that just maybe we should hesitate before excommunicating. This is a lot of words. I don't want to just yada, yada, yada this, but from polite society, anyone who has attempted to gather with a theme now found objectionable. I don't understand really what they're talking about here. This also has no link, so I don't really know how I'm supposed to give this greater context, but the language that they're using to describe, this is so vague as to be nothing. I have no idea what this is in reference to, and there's no link to it, so I can't really adequately evaluate whether or not this is ironic. So in this list of supposed examples that prove this premise and this conclusion, or that provide the proof that relate this premise to this conclusion, I've got one thing that doesn't seem ironic, one thing that could be ironic, and one thing that we are unclear about the rightness or wrongness of attributing the idea of irony to it. So I don't know. So it's one for one. That doesn't even get you on base. So I'm not really persuaded the logic between these two ideas is very unclear. And I don't know what you mean that in the world of cancel culture, irony is dead here. I don't really see how that's a validated statement. That's not a pretty persuasive demonstration of reasoning to me. Over the last few weeks, meanwhile, the issue du jour has been problematic books. Okay, so we're moving on. So now we have another example of what this cancel culture means. Without a word, warning, or explanation, Amazon removed from its digital shelves When Harry Became Sally, a sober and scholarly book by Ryan T. Anderson that critiques the left's radical approach to sex, gender identity, and sex reassignment procedures. Despite weeks of complaints, the book remains unavailable, apparently rendered permanently anathema by the world's largest online bookseller. What does it mean to be anathema? It's an oldie, right? It's an oldie but a goodie. This one we might be useful to go to ye old etymology dictionary. An accursed thing, from the Latin athema, an excommunicated person, the curse of excommunication. It comes out of ecclesiastical Greek. A thing accursed. A slight variation on this word, which I'm not going to pronounce, which meant merely a thing devoted, literally a thing set up to the gods, such as a votive offering in a temple, Anna, and Tithenia, to put to place, from whatever that means. This is a very old like religiously connoted word, right? It has a very, very specific, like sort of like moral bent to it. We could look it up in the dictionary. There's a more clear definition of it if we just go to Merriam-Webster. Someone or something intensely disliked or loathed, usually as a predicate nominative. And that's just a fancy way of saying you are anathema, right? I am become anathema, destroyer of worlds, or something like that, right? A predicate nominative is just when you use a form of the verb to be and you use an adjective right after that in order to say that X is Y, the predicate nominative is an adjective operating as a predicate adjective. This is a fancy way of saying what turned out to be a fancy way of explaining that. So sorry to confuse by explanation. A ban or a curse solemnly pronounced by ecclesiastical authority, accompanied by excommunication, right? There's some strongly religious undertones to the idea of cancel culture, right? That like tied up in this definition of it, like this idea of censuring and ostracizing and things becoming anathema, right? It's leveling an accusation of moral denunciation and shame upon something, in addition to punishing, right? It's sort of prosecuting someone in the court of public opinion is another popular way of saying that. So we have this example of this book that you can't get on Amazon anymore. And there's a link to this. I happen to remember some of this happening, but this is actually, this is the way that that DeSanctis has described this. This is not censure, this is censorship, right? This is a company deciding that they are not selling a book. They are making this book unavailable for people to get. And censorship is not necessarily involved in their definition of cancel culture. Although I guess you could say it's a part of punishing because now you've made this thing unavailable. But it is interesting that this is more what we would probably call censorship in a general way. Not government censorship. There's no law that says Amazon can't, Amazon can choose to sell whatever Amazon wants to sell. But I'm generally not a fan of censorship. So if this is an unfairly done thing, then I'm willing to listen. More recently, we have more books. The debate over unacceptable literature has turned to the work of Theodore Seuss Giselle, I think it's Giselle, better known as children's author Dr. Seuss. In a Virginia school district, several of Seuss's books were removed from the list for National Read Across America Day, having been deemed inappropriate for children due to allegedly racially insensitive content. One library chain announced that a number of Seuss's titles remain available, but would be relocating from the children's section to the adult, lest a child stumble across this literary contraband. What is contraband?
Illegal goods.
Yeah, against the band, right? I actually don't know what band means in that sense. Goods or merchandise whose importation, exportation, or possession is forbidden, right? More forbiddenness. But again, this is really more of describing like the punishment angle, the ostracizing, maybe some form of censorship here. I would immediately charge this with like some suppressed evidence, because the way that they have this worded in a Virginia school district, several of Seuss's books were removed. First of all, it's in the passive, which is concerning. Who removed them, right? Was it the whole school district, or was it just one school in this district? So there were several books. Which books, right? That would seem to be important, right? I can't really, I can chase this down. But again, I just want to concentrate on just the language that this author is giving me. One thing I sort of noticed in some of y'all's responses is that there is attention to links, especially like in terms of credibility and assessing sources. And I think that's really good. But it's also, I don't want to over attribute, in the same way that I don't want to over attribute like weight to somebody's credentials. I don't want to over attribute like reliance on these links, right? It's because we are looking at the language, right? And we don't know who put these links there. We don't know if it was the author. We don't know if it was necessarily the editor. So we want to be, we don't want to ignore them necessarily, but we do want to sort of bracket our feelings about them, right? We don't want it to like give it too much weight. So I'm worried, I'm a little concerned about this passive voice. I'm a little interested about what specific books were removed. And they were just removed from a list. one library chain announced. Now, so what's this relation to that, right? Is this a library chain in a Virginia school district? Is this a different library chain? The relationship between these two ideas is not necessarily clear. This seems to be making a separate claim. It leads me to believe that maybe these are two different districts, but it's kind of being presented in a way that it seems easy to conflate them. Again, I don't want to read too much into this, but it does seem like there's some ambiguity going on here. There's like an interesting passive voice that's removing like a clear sense of responsibility. There's some vagueness about several of his books, so I don't know which exact ones. So it's different. There's no description of it. It just says allegedly racial insensitive content. You know, I don't know too much about Dr. Seuss, but I do know that he also drew a bunch of propaganda cartoons during World War II that did not age well. We'll just say that. I haven't really, I don't know if that's in any of his children's books, but I haven't read all the Dr. Seuss books. What I vaguely remember about the places you'll go might not be, indicative of all of the man's work. So a description would be nice, right? And again, so there's this strategy of not being particularly descriptive whenever it seems to suit the author to be a little bit more vague that I'm not really a fan of here. It's troubling enough that those who wield cultural power have such a strong instinct to silence opponents and anathematize views with which they agree, and that they so often get away with doing rather forcibly. This is just kind of a claim in isolation. So far, you're just telling me a story about the left is forcibly suppressing people. From all of these examples, I've seen Amazon chose to remove a book. One or possibly two school districts reclassified some Dr. Seuss books. Maybe Disney fired somebody for something ironic. Some guy from the New York Times resigned, which seems ironic. And then there's this weird story about a television host who recused himself. I don't really see this like kind of boogeyman that you're painting the left, with whatever that means, coming for lots of things and forcibly like levying consequences. If there are so many examples, I think you could have found better examples, clearer examples, or at least described these examples in such a way that it sounded like this thing, right? Getting away with something forcibly. I don't really see that from the way that you've described this. But even more concerning is that at root, this approach demonstrates deep disrespect for human freedom and resilience, as well as for each individual's ability to choose how he wishes to encounter other views and decides his beliefs for himself, which, taken on the face of it, this does appeal to, like, this is a pathos-based appeal that does appeal to me, right? Like, okay, sure, I do generally believe that more censorship is not good. That's a common social virtue that you're appealing to, that, a little bit of pathos, a little bit of ethos may be gaining back there, but I'm not getting a strong sense of ethos from the way that they're describing a lot of this stuff. I'm getting a lot of storytelling, but I'm not necessarily getting a lot of, I'm also getting some evidence, I'm getting some logos. I just don't think it's really described in a robust way that I clearly understand exactly what you're talking about, right? I think this person's trying to make a common sense deductive argument. And if that's going to hold, I need much stronger definitions that are just crystal clear. Like, deduction really only works when there's no fuzziness. If there's ambiguity, deduction doesn't work as well as it should, or as it could. Cancel culture isn't just the mentality of bullies and tattletales. It's a mentality adopted by culture war obsessives who believe it's their responsibility to protect foolish people from themselves. It's an outgrowth of the belief that articulating certain views or phrases can cause literal harm, speech redefined as violence, and that therefore those views must be silenced for the sake of those who might suffer such harm. This way of thinking can only end in state police speech and systematic punishment of wrongthing. And this is the first of my triggers, is the phrase wrongthing. One, I think you're telling me a story. You're telling me in a story about who's redefining speech as violence. This is an idea that seems maybe related to ideas I've heard about in therapy-like ideas, that the things that we say do have effects and consequences. I have heard of the idea of speech being redefined as violence, but you're not telling me who is doing this. Just kind of attributing this vaguely to the left. So there's like this growing sense of the appeal to fear that's kind of bubbling beneath the surface of this argument. And then by the time we get here, this way of thinking can only end in state police speech and systematic punishment. That's clear slippery slope. Like that's just an appeal to fear and scare tactics. Fun question. Does wrong think make you think of any person or maybe book in particular? Okay, good. Wrong think. It's not a word that you see too often, right? We have a word for whenever you take two words and smash them together and make a new word. It's called portmanteau, right? This particular portmanteau invokes a very particular guy. Wrong think is really strongly influenced by Mr. George Orwell himself. Wrong think invokes the idea of thought crime. Thought crime think. He, in 1984, Orwell created this language called doublespeak. Doublespeak is a language that the horrible oppressive government in 1984 comes up with in order to brainwash their citizens into thinking simpler concepts by disavowing or disabling them from thinking about complicated things, reducing things into these oversimplifications. And usually these oversimplifications are in the form of these like contradictory ideas that you have to live with. And you have to, it sort of produces a society of people that live in a constant state of cognitive dissonance. You're constantly trying to rectify contradictory ideas. Everything is crime think. And it sort of produces a society where everybody is surveilling everybody else. There is widespread government censorship, but the upshot, spoiler alert, of 1984 is that everyone wants to censor everyone else. The whole idea of Winston Smith in 1984 is that at the end of 1984, again, spoiler alert, it's been around for a long time, Winston Smith chooses to love Big Brother. Winston Smith wants to participate in the society that Big Brother offers him. He wants to participate in this cognitive dissonance. So whenever you see things like this wrong thing, this is what I call this the fallacy. This is like the Hitler fallacy to me. This is like the George Orwell fallacy, the reductio ad 1984. If you're just sort of reducing everything, you're saying this is just like 1984, you're invoking the weak analogy, right? I think you're invoking the weak analogy. Perhaps you don't think this is the weak analogy. And this is really the ideological power of, or maybe not the ideological power of, but like the ideological difference of people interpreting things as fallacious. If DeSanctis is telling you a story that you think paints an accurate picture of the world, and you happen to think that political correctness is doublespeak or something like that, then this probably doesn't seem like weak analogy to you. This might seem like accurate analogy to you. This might seem like strong analogy. I tend to really bristle at comparisons to 1984. You go on Twitter, you'll find people on the left and right beating the hell out of each other with 1984, saying that it absolutely means exactly what they think it means. And I think the point of 1984 is that George Orwell is a very good writer, and he is very good at satirizing all sorts of political stripes. George Orwell himself is a socialist writing about a socialist dystopia. And he is somebody that conservatives and liberals alike will hold up and say, look what your way of thinking leads to. So I don't know. He's a guy on the left criticizing the left, but also the right. And it's also not that, it's not that seamless. It's not that clearly defined. He's criticizing like Sovietism more than anything else. Maybe you could say that he's, very disillusioned with a form of communism, but there's definitely like, he's not just, if you read 1984 and you think, wow, what a conservative, then you miss the point of 1984. He's definitely not, especially in the European sense, he's definitely not a conservative. Anyhow, so this slippery slope into 1984, I don't like that movement or strategy at all. I think that's just like, well, let's open the door to this, like, oh, all this cancel culture is inevitably leading us right to 1984, and it's not 1984 in my opinion. So I don't find that particularly compelling. While this attitude tramples on the natural right of every human person to speak freely and defend his views, it also disrespects the freedom and confidence of those who seek to protect it. Again, I'm getting a lot of claims and I'm getting a lot of stories about that are sort of illustrating these claims. I'm not getting a strong sense of deductive reasoning coming out of this, because again, this person's already kind of lost me with their definitions. I think there's too much vagueness. I think there's too much ambiguity that's already sort of permeated through this argument. The mindset seeks in part, and again, there's all this speculative psychology attributing to whole swaths of a population a particular motivation. I think is at least the hasty generalization, right? Maybe at worst the hasty generalization, but this mindset seeks in part to shield ideological, racial, or other minorities from speech that some find offensive. Though some people within those minority groups might agree with the decision to shut down harmful speech, the impulse to do so demonstrates inherent condescension toward the supposed beneficiaries of such a policy. So this is, I guess, the heart of what they mean earlier when they say, in the world of cancel culture, irony is dead, right? The irony that they're alluding to is the more that you try to protect people, the more that you're actually hurting. Right. That's the author's point. I don't think they make that very compellingly. I think they're telling me a lot of stories that they want me to believe. I'm not really getting a strong sense of again, logic that is backing a lot of this up. This is really pathos driven. This notion treats members of minority groups as if they can't bear to hear offensive comments and can't manage to articulate their own competing views unless authorities assist them by removing problematic content from the public square. And this word authorities, I think, is being equivocated on really strongly here, because broadly speaking, the only authorities that we've really talked about are Amazon's self-censorship. We've talked about a couple of people taking actions against themselves and one company firing somebody for something. It's just not a lot of meat on the bone when you come to showing me authorities clamping down in a 1984 way on thought crime. I just don't see that in this argument. Who are these authorities that you're alluding to, right? In this case, the authorities are Amazon, I guess, or maybe this one school district in Virginia. I don't know why those are not just, not cherry-picked examples. Amazon's kind of a big deal. It's a big bookseller. If you don't get your content hosted on Amazon, it's, you can sell it elsewhere. It does severely limit your ability to reach people, but Amazon isn't, it's not unilaterally the only place to buy books. Do members of racial minorities, for instance, really need the local library system to step up in and remove or reshelve children's books so as not to hurt their feelings? That's the question that's at stake, right? Don't pose that. That's just a claim as a rhetorical question, right? Clearly the answer that you want me to lead me to is no. But this is assuming what we've yet to prove. Must television stations memory hole Gone with the Wind and a dozen more movies in case their backwards treatment of slavery offends the modern ear? Well, now you're just non sequitur. You've just introduced something completely brand new that you haven't even mentioned before. I haven't watched cable television in a while. I vaguely remember something about Gone with the Wind a few years ago. That's about as far as that goes. If you want to introduce that premise, describe what happened to Gone with the Wind, right? Don't just frame this as a rhetorical question and expect me to just be on board with you. This tells me these rhetorical questions and the general strategy of this tell me that the intended audience are people who already believe this. This is not an argument that is attempting to persuade somebody that doesn't believe that cancel culture isn't exactly what they claim, that, isn't purely an invention of angry right-wingers. Because this sounds kind of like a teed off conservative that is these people are just trying to control you. And, if that's the case, I want to give me the evidence of that. I don't want to commit myself to moving the goalpost and say, well, you've given me quite enough evidence. I don't think you've given me a robust sense of evidence. The one thing I'm willing to grant you on this is maybe the Dr. Seuss stuff, and probably Amazon is a good example of censorship. Other than that, I just don't think there's a whole lot going on here other than some rhetorical tricks. Perhaps we can trust thinking adults to avoid content they find offensive or troubling and leave the librarians and television networks out of it. Meanwhile, as they attempt to protect supposedly victimized groups, now again, you're supposedly victimized, it's okay. Purveyors of cancel culture turn their condescension on the rest of us, behaving as though it's their job to save the rubes around them from falling victim to bad ideas, right? Emphasis with capitalization. It is antithetical to human freedom to insist that some wise subset of the elite, or eventually the state, again, like kind of an implicit slippery slope here, right? Oh, first it's the elites, and then tomorrow it's the state coming down on you. Again, you've like, that's not the argument that you're making. You're preying on my sense of fear that things are going to change, right? If I'm a conservative reading this, I might be afraid that things are going to change. So you're doing nothing more than just stoking my fear that things are changing in a way that aren't going to like, right? But you're not, even as a conservative who would want to believe this, I don't think you're really giving me the goods, right? You're not really giving me like the examples abounding evidence that like you alluded to earlier. Yet we must instruct the rest of us in what we ought to read, buy, watch, and say. And yet we increasingly live in a society where a vocal minority of racist TV episodes or censor celebrities on the grounds that their wrong speak, again with that 1984 double talk, might infect the brains of the common individual. Again, you're just telling me a story that to me does not comport totally with my experience. I think this is like a gross oversimplification. In the end, the most important question is the same one at stake in every debate over how to govern society. Who decides? And now, again, we're sort of equivocating. Like, Amazon isn't governing society. Like, they're definitely an important part of the social fabric. They're in control, in a sense, of a large market share of moving products around, but they're not governing. I don't know, even in a de facto way, I don't even know if you could call that, if they rise to the level of like a censoring authority. Who decides? Which governing body shall we put in charge of determining which jokes or books or TV episodes are too harmful to let people access? You know, I don't know. What are you talking about there is what I would say to that. Which governing body shall we put in charge? This is a complex question. We have to reject the whole premise. Nobody is arguing that we should put anybody in charge of any of this, right? If we're a society of individuals that can freely make choices, and Amazon can choose not to sell whatever they want, maybe you have an argument that these public schools shouldn't be, removing Dr. Seuss from the shelves. But that's also not exactly what you're saying. You're saying these public schools removed him from a national reading list. Okay, well, that's not enshrined in law anywhere. They have the freedom to do that. And one school district has reshelved books. Yeah, you might find that objectionable, but that's not 1984. That's reshelving. I don't know. Like, that's not. It was also just a select few books, right? Anyhow, so much for this argument. So this one commits some things that I am not a big fan of. This one, I think, has the same problem that Tucker had. This one is a little bit too assured of its own sense of self-satisfaction. How are we doing here? We don't have too much time, so I'll just highlight some of the important things here. The way this one is jumping in on the cancel culture thing is to frame this as talking about Trump, and in particular, the events that transpired or possibly conspired around the January 6th, we'll just call it the January 6th incident. So in the aftermath of the pro-Trump riots that left 5 dead at the United States Capitol, right, we immediately have a way that that's being characterized. They're riots that left 5 dead at the United States Capitol. I think a distortion, not a totally not a totally egregious distortion. A couple of those people died from complications after it. Are we squabbling over the definition of left for dead? At least Ashley Babbitt was killed, and at least one other cop, I believe, was beaten to death that day. But we'll just leave that open for interpretation. Republicans have focused on the real problem, cancel culture, right? So again, this sense of irony is very important to have, right? Oh, the real problem isn't, these people dying in a riot. The real problem is, oh, we're mad at cancel culture. Citing the president's removal from just about every social media app in existence and the scores of companies announcing they would no longer do business with Donald Trump or his family, Eric Trump blamed the left. We live in an age of cancel culture. This isn't something that started this week, he said. It is something that they have been doing to us and others for years. Eric Trump, very good at creating bad arguments. The whole us versus them thing is kind of classic textbook false dichotomy. But aside from that fact, we haven't gotten we don't really have a definition of cancel culture quite yet here. But what we have is we have a framing. We have Trump's removal from social media. This is the primary thing that we're starting with. Is this cancel culture? And I think, in terms of the way that it was defined in this argument, censoring, ostracizing, and punishing, yeah, that's most definitely cancel culture, right? He was sort of removed from everywhere that wouldn't have him. So much so that this is the thing. I don't know. This raises the definition of punishment too, because if Trump ended up making money off of this in the long run, is that necessarily punishment? There's definitely punishment in the short term because he couldn't communicate effectively. He could have chosen to go to another platform like Parler, God forbid. Parler was awful. Content-wise, but just software-wise. Parler was a bad code of software to use. He could have gone to Gab. He could have gone to BitChute and put videos of himself up. He could have. There are alternatives that he could have done. None with as wide of a reach as Twitter or YouTube or any of the Facebook or Twitter. I think I said Twitter twice. Twitter, we love Twitter. He does have his own version of Twitter now, which is theoretically valued at billions of dollars. So I don't know if that's cancel culture or if he was able to cash in on no publicity is bad publicity. I don't know. That seems a little bit incoherent to me. So maybe that's not cancel culture. Maybe the jury's still out on whether or not Trump's ultimate removal from social media rises to the level of public shaming. He definitely was shamed by a very vocal group, let's call it. I don't even want to say a minority or a majority, but he did lose the popular vote, unless you believe in fairy tales about Dominion. But the voters weren't the ones that shamed him necessarily from Twitter, right? Twitter has a very narrow following. There are orders of magnitudes of more users of Instagram than there are even of Twitter. Of the big social media platforms, Twitter is the smallest. So Representative Jim Jordan, one of the president's most vociferous defenders, made a similar case on the floor of the House, arguing that Trump wasn't being impeached for encouraging an insurrection. We wanted to cancel the president. I don't want to actually follow that link. Trump himself ended a short pre-taped speech that was largely devoted to belatedly imploring his supporters to renounce violence by condemning the efforts to censor, cancel, and blacklist our fellow citizens. So there's this list in very much the same way. This author proceeds in a list of examples that mean to be specific framings of this is what it is, right? It's definition by ostentation, kind of, right? Pointing, this is an example, and this is an example, and this is an example. So the right's embrace of cancel culture concept has been growing steadily for years. Conservatives have complained about students deplatforming the likes of Yiannopoulos and Charles Murray, and Tucker Carlson has railed against it for a good year. But the term really became ubiquitous last summer after Tom Cotton sent in the troops op-ed, resulting in the ouster from the New York Times editorial editor James Bennett and former Times opinion editor Barry Weiss subsequently self-canceled. This, I believe, is what this person is referring to when they talk about a Times journalist asked to resign. I think this might be the thing that they're describing. Both of them using this as an example of this is what people mean when they talk about cancel culture. I think that that's important simply because it is a common thing between the two arguments. Also featured heavily, what does it even mean to be canceled? For years, the people warning about cancel culture have been conflating online criticism with cancellation, which is both more ominous sounding and mere criticism, and also a hell of a lot more amorphous. In a semi-ironic 2018 New York Times piece, John Ingle Bromwich argued that, quote, almost everyone worth knowing had been canceled for crimes, both small and large. Bill Gates, Gwen Stefani, Erykah Badu, Cristiano Ronaldo, and on and on. Needless to say, none of these people has actually been canceled. So, and this is where I kind of have a problem with this argument. And it really raises a legitimate question between these two arguments, and what I feel like ideologies end up talking past each other on is there a distinction, and what is the distinction between legitimate criticism and merely expressing dislike, right? Like, when you agree with cancel culture, it seems like it's holding people accountable for behavior that is morally objectionable. When you disagree with cancel culture, it is unfairly substituting your opinion for fact, or for what should pass as moral condemnation. So there's like an authenticity question at the heart of cancel culture, and which isn't really resolved. And this idea about, I think this is the one thing that this argument does particularly well, is it raises this distinction, but it doesn't really go into this none of these people have actually been canceled. It really raises the question, like, one of the things the question I have about Trump is, like, if you ultimately benefit in the long run, have you been canceled, right? People talk about, Harry Potter author, what's her name?
J.K. Rowling?
That's the one. People talk about J.K. Rowling being canceled. I don't know. Is she still making money? Like, what does it mean for her to be canceled, right? If it just means that they went through a rough patch online of online criticism and harassment, I don't want to sound too callous, but like, welcome to the internet. The internet is a place for people to harass people and stalk them, and probably just share torrented videos. It doesn't make it right, but it definitely makes everyone more accessible. I think there's a legitimate question to ask over whether or not the consequences of like what it means to be canceled are legitimate. How much power do individuals even really wield in that space? Is it like Elon Musk says, is Twitter some kind of public trust that needs, some kind of protection to where you shouldn't be moderating content? Everybody's a free speech absolutist until people start secretly sharing pornography on your platform. And if that's the case, and those, where is the line between removing people for legitimate content moderation concerns and removing people? Like, there's a point at which censorship does become badly defined, it seems, and maybe past that point, maybe there is too much moderation. But those points seem pretty arbitrary. And if we're going to set those boundaries, I think what we've seen in the past 5 years, that those are difficult boundaries to police. Even if we're trying to do it in good faith. Elon, I'm really curious about the Elon thing too, because he tried to buy Twitter, and he was very much about like, I'm going to put Trump back on Twitter. Twitter is a public square for free expression. And now all of a sudden he's like trying to back out of buying Twitter. And I don't know if he claims that he was kind of sold a bill of goods, that there's more bots on Twitter and they're more of a disaster than they led him to believe, and they've been sort of cagey with giving him enough information to have made the deal. I think that, I don't know. I think part of it might be that like it might be harder to run something like Twitter than Elon Musk at first believed. I have no evidence for that. That's my conspiracy theory about Elon Musk. Is he realized it's hard to be content. You can't be a free speech absolutist. You have to like moderate some content, and that's like real hard, and he just doesn't want to do it. It's so much easier to be a critic than it is to be like an active moderator. Anyhow, so I think these arguments again, we're not going to get to most of the stuff in this argument. I mainly wanted to pit these arguments together so that I could like take a long look at what the argument for cancel culture seems to be, or the argument against the idea of cancel culture being a good thing is, and to see and to introduce this complication to it of what does it actually mean to suffer those consequences. On that note, I will go ahead and stop.